When people hear the word Rome, they think of grand marble temples, armored legions, eloquent senators, and the so-called cradle of Western civilization. Rome is often celebrated as the birthplace of law, order, and progress. But beneath the marble facades and military glory lies a darker, more disturbing truth. A society built upon the systematic exploitation, humiliation, and control of women. This is not the Rome of Hollywood epics. This is the Rome that reduced marriage to property contracts, that treated female bodies as legal commodities, and that sanctified violence through law and ritual. Over the next 30 minutes, we will uncover how Roman culture institutionalized misogyny, how religion became a cage, and how the legacy of this cruelty echoes long after the empire's fall. Roman marriage was never about love. At its core, it was a transaction. Under the system known as manus, a woman passed from her father's control into the hand of her husband. She was not considered an equal partner, but a dependent, absorbed legally into her husband's household. Her property, her body, and even her legal identity became his. A Roman father could arrange a daughter's marriage the same way he might arrange a business deal. To him, she was both an heir and an asset, her fertility a resource to be bartered. And once married, she ceased to exist in her own right. She could not own property independently, she could not represent herself in court, and she certainly could not resist her husband's authority. Even the language reveals this reality. Connubium, the right to marry, was defined not as mutual consent, but as a man's right to claim a woman in lawful union. Marriage was ownership dressed as tradition. The Romans did not merely control women's marriages, they controlled their sexuality at its root. Consider the Vestal Virgins, perhaps the most sacred women of Rome. Chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of celibacy, they lived under constant surveillance. They were praised for their purity, honored in public, granted privileges other women could never dream of. But this honor was a gilded cage. If a Vestal broke her vow, the punishment was not exile, not shame, but burial alive. She would be lowered into a chamber beneath the earth with a lamp, some food, and left to suffocate in the darkness. Rome declared this execution a religious necessity, not a murder, because the people believed spilling a Vestal's blood would curse the city. Thus, virginity became a political ritual. The state cloaked oppression in sacredness, ensuring that the female body itself served as a vessel of Roman survival. While some women were caged in purity, others were forced into prostitution. In Rome, prostitution was legal, but not voluntary. A mere accusation could brand a woman a prostitute. Once registered, she carried the legal mark of infamia, a permanent loss of status. She could no longer marry respectably, testify in court, or protect herself from abuse. Wealthy men exploited this system. A father could silence a rebellious daughter by declaring her a prostitute. A husband could discredit his wife with the same accusation, and society accepted this as lawful. For the poorest women, especially enslaved women, prostitution was unavoidable. Brothels flourished across the empire, many of them state-owned, their profits feeding directly into Rome's economy. Festivals often required female slaves to serve as public entertainment, turning their bodies into instruments of ritual pleasure. Rome did not merely tolerate sexual exploitation, it institutionalized it. In Rome, rape was not a crime against a woman, it was a crime against property. If a wife was assaulted, the offense was not that her body was violated, but that her husband's honor and ownership were infringed. If an unmarried daughter was attacked, the shame fell upon her father. And the legal remedy was often marriage. The rapist could repair his crime by marrying his victim, thereby restoring the father's household honor. Consent was irrelevant. Trauma was irrelevant. What mattered was the preservation of male authority. This logic allowed Rome to wage wars of sexual violence without consequence. Conquered women were considered the spoils of victory, distributed among soldiers as rightful plunder. Rape became not only tolerated, but glorified as a sign of domination. When Roman society faced infertility, women bore the blame. Ancient physicians insisted that a barren marriage was always the woman's fault. Their so-called cures ranged from the absurd to the brutal. Some women were forced to inhale smoke or steam in the belief that it would open the womb. Others were beaten across the abdomen, subjected to forced penetrations with strange objects, or fed concoctions made from animal organs, blood, or ashes. Medical texts from the period reveal an obsession with testing virginity. Bizarre rituals like making a girl walk across eggshells or swallow potions to prove her chastity. None of this was science. It was control, disguised as medicine. The darkest exploitation fell on Rome's slaves. Enslaved women were considered sexual property by default. A master could use, abuse, and discard them without legal repercussion. Slave markets openly advertise young girls for purchase, their descriptions listing not only age and strength, but sexual desirability. In many households, enslaved women were forced to serve as both laborers and concubines. Wealthy Romans staged banquets where slave girls were ordered to dance naked, to serve wine unclothed, to endure assault for the amusement of guests. Children born from such violations were not recognized as victims, they were automatically enslaved, added to the master's wealth. In this way, rape became an economic strategy, a means of producing more slaves for profit. Roman justice extended beyond control. It reveled in humiliation. Women convicted of adultery could be stripped, paraded through the streets, or even executed in the arena. Some were thrown to wild beasts as public entertainment, their deaths presented as moral lessons for the crowd. Other punishments included shaving a woman's head, branding her face, or banishing her to remote islands. These acts were not about correcting behavior, but about transforming shame into spectacle. Rome made examples of women's suffering to reinforce male dominance. Even entertainers, dancers, actresses, musicians were legally classified as infames. Their art condemned them to a life of vulnerability, marked forever as unworthy of protection. Despite repression, Roman women sought ways to control their fertility. Ancient texts describe potions of herbs, animal dung, or exotic spices. One plant, silphium, became so prized as a contraceptive that it was harvested into extinction. But many methods were dangerous, toxic, or ineffective. Some women drank the urine of eunuchs, others inserted crocodile dung as a supposed barrier. In their desperation, they risked poisoning or death simply to escape the endless cycle of forced motherhood. Religion itself often mocked these efforts. Fertility rituals blurred the line between sacred ceremony and sexual exploitation, binding women once again to the demands of the state and its gods. For Roman men, remarriage after the death of a spouse was immediate and encouraged. For women, it was forbidden until 10 months had passed. The reason? Male lawmakers believed that semen lingered inside a woman's body, and only after 10 months could they be certain a child did not belong to the previous husband. A widow who broke this rule could face severe punishment. The message was clear. Women's bodies were not their own. They were vessels of male lineage. Even in grief, even in solitude, the state dictated their sexuality. Perhaps the greatest authority in Rome was the jus vitae nescis, the father's right of life and death. A Roman father could kill his daughter if he believed she had dishonored the family, whether through adultery, premarital sex, or even suspicion of disobedience. This was not a theoretical law. Historical records describe fathers executing their daughters with impunity, their actions praised as defense of family honor. A woman's life was always conditional, always subject to male judgment. When women entered the political stage, They were weaponized as symbols. Imperial wives and mothers were praised for chastity or condemned for excess. Livia, the wife of Augustus, was painted as the perfect matron, silent and obedient. Messalina, wife of Claudius, was vilified as the embodiment of lust. True or false, these narratives served one purpose: to define the empire through women's bodies. Either idealized or demonized, women in power were denied true agency. Their reputations were tools of propaganda, their lives instruments of male ambition. In the end, the greatest cruelty of Rome was this: women who suffered became women who were blamed. A woman assaulted could be accused of provoking her attacker. A woman raped might be forbidden from entering temples, punished for impurity. Victims carried stigma, while perpetrators carried power.